Hey everybody, we're looking at the civil rights movement, and one of the things we're kind of taking a break from the nonviolent movement, those kind of things, looking at President Kennedy. I mean, and how the politics played a role in the civil rights movement as well. We talked about Eisenhower a little bit before, send troops in, those kind of things. But really, the first time a president gets really involved in the civil rights movement is with President Kennedy. Now, who is this guy? Okay, you see him right here. Born to his father, wealthy diplomat. He was educated in a lot of boarding schools. That means that he was sent to these rich places where he would move and lived there for a while. He was educated at Harvard University as well. So he's got a really great upper class education. He actually volunteered for World War II. He served in the Navy. He served on a PT boat, was considered a war hero. His little PT boat, little boat he was on, was cut in half by a big Japanese destroyer, and he actually single-handedly saved members of his crew by dragging them ashore and going back. He wrote a book, okay, about the Munich settlement, where the appeasement process helped Adolf Hitler. And his dad was a part of it. He actually won a Pulitzer Prize for his book, and he was also one of the youngest people ever to serve in Congress, one of the youngest senators ever. He is, very young, very idealistic. Oh, look at him. He's a good-looking guy. I mean, honestly, he's a good-looking guy. He had a very young, attractive wife, all those kind of things. And the election of 1960 comes up. He goes up against then Vice President Richard Nixon, who was also a war hero, those kind of things. But it's the first time that TV really played a big role. Commercials been used before, kind of cartoons, those kind of things, but now you have the debate, okay, where you have the two candidates on TV in front of the entire nation debating. And so image and how you looked was very, very important. So you kind of see Nixon, you see Kennedy here. Obviously, Kennedy's the youngest president ever, but they're very, very different. I mean, Kennedy was Catholic. Okay, there'd never been a Catholic president at this point yet in history. Nixon was Protestant. Okay, Nixon was very, very middle class, whereas Kennedy was this elite, rich guy. Kennedy's young, and he's young. He's in his 40s. Nixon's a lot older. Style and image. Kennedy's got this cool style, good looking, all those kind of things. Whereas here, Nixon, he was part of HUAC, vice president, all kind of things. TV played a big role, right? I mean, in the end, Kennedy wore makeup on TV. Nixon didn't, and he looked a lot better on TV. And very, very, very barely wins the election in 1960. Some people still think he did not win the election. That fraud happened. That people are stuffing ballots or extra people are voting, that kind of stuff. Usually in Chicago, and there's some arguments about that. Now, besides these issues, he is elected president, youngest president ever elected at age 43. As I said, being Catholic, there were a lot of prejudice this time. People loved his youth, his good looks, and very idealistic, a lot of great ideas. It was much more appealing in those debates. Now, they called the Kennedy White House Camelot. I mean, honestly, the Kennedys were treated like pop stars. They were the Kardashians, if you will, of their time. Everyone was up in this business. Everyone's trying to photograph what they were doing. Everyone was wondering what was going on. His wife, Jackie, was at the height of fashion. I mean, ladies copied her hairstyle. They copied what she wore, her jewelry, her clothes, all that kind of stuff. She was very public with everything. I mean, like other first ladies. They had two young children. They've been a long time since they were young kids in the White House. I mean, Truman and Eisenhower were both grandfathers for crying out loud. I mean, there have been young kids in the White House since Teddy Roosevelt, another young president. And the country was like obsessed with and fascinated with this young family and the things that they were doing. Now, we're going to focus on Kennedy's domestic stuff here. We'll come back to his Cold War foreign policies later on. And in his inauguration speech, he has a very, very famous quote. Watch part of this in class here. He says, "Ask not what you can do for what your country can do for you, but what can you do for your country." The idea that, hey, everybody needs to get together, work together, band together, and make this country great. Now, he made some questionable things right away. His younger brother, Bobby, also as RFK, Robert F. Kennedy, was appointed as the Attorney General, the top cop in the United States. People are like, wow, is that a little nepotism? Is that, giving your brother jobs, that kind of stuff? Anyway, he had a lot of questions that way. And one of the first programs he started up was something called New Frontier. He said the program, his New Frontier's domestic education policy was to basically make sure that we had a better country. Okay, he wanted to provide education for everybody, medical care to people who need it, and also want to work to end racial discrimination. Part of the education stuff came in making our country great, and part of that was the idea of the space race. I mean, the U.S. was really behind in terms of space. I mean, they lost first person to space, the first satellite, I should say. Soviet Union put a man in orbit. We'll talk about it in a second. And in his speech, Kennedy even made a promise. He says, by the end of this decade, we will put a man on the moon. And guess what? They do. Okay? There's a space race. So the first man in the orbit space was the cosmonaut, the Soviet Union named Yuri Gagarin. Here he is right here. He just passed away not too long ago. All right? So obviously that that notion, U.S. is behind already. So NASA has formed the National Aeronautics Space Association, or NASA, right here, and they're using all these information they have, German scientists from World War II, all kind of stuff to make the ships that are able to get people up into space. So at first started Project Mercury, and our first two guys in space were Alan Shepard, he was shot up into space first, and John Glenn, who just passed away recently too, was the first man to ever orbit in space. So the Mercury probe was a small capsule, one man going up, and being able to try and just orbit was the goal. Can we get people around the Earth? Gemini was the next one. It was two people in a capsule, get up there and actually do something in space. Can you do experiments, do those kind of deals? And lastly was the goal to get to the moon. That was the Apollo program. So with Apollo 1, they have some setbacks. They eventually get to the moon by 1969 when they land July 20th. And we'll talk about that a little later on too. Another thing that Kennedy started was something called the Peace Corps. Peace Corps was for college-age people who volunteer to go to other countries, developing countries, so Africa, Asia, Latin America, so on and so forth. Help with education, help with cities like water, construction, hospitals, medicine, all that kind of stuff. Kind of a Cold War idea, if you will, but also a place for college people to go get some experience, a place for young people to do some good. And it also help the U.S. to support the developing world, kind of be that world leader going forward. Now, back to the Civil Rights Movement, where Kennedy fits in here. As Kennedy becomes president, there's a group called CORE. They're called the Congress of Racial Equality. They wanted to make sure that desegregated buses that happened to boycott were truly desegregated. And anytime an interstate bus was supposed to be they're supposed to be desegregated. So this group of people, both white and black, a lot of them college students, took these bus trips from the north down to south. Now, in this case, the blacks rode in the front and the whites rode in the back, which is not the way, which according to this people in the south, it was not supposed to be. They would go to these interstate bus stations, and they would see the police, look and see how the buses look, and they'd actually have African Americans actually enter the white-only bus station, and just to test and see what would happen. And they were met with tons of violence. I mean, we're talking bombings, they'd blow up buses, that kind of thing, beatings. The state patrol would be there with nightsticks, all that kind of stuff was going on. Even shootings, those kind of things to the Freedom Riders that were heading down south. Now, President Kennedy's response to the violence, he was trying to support both sides, right? It was really hard. He wanted to try and support those trying to keep civil rights going on. At the same time, though, he couldn't lose Southern votes. He had to make sure he stayed in office. And it was really hard for him to come out and say one thing or another because he has to make sure he can get reelected. And so he originally, early on, was unable to gain more voting rights, unable to gain more rights and violence, all kind of stuff because of that. So what did he do is a bigger question, okay? He did a few things, like when Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested in Florida, arrested down south. He called his wife, helped him out. He had his brother try to help him get out of jail, those kind of things. He actually did send troops to Mississippi when James Meredith, who's in the picture right here, the first ever African-American University of Mississippi, he helped send troops to help protect him. He federalized the Alabama National Guard to let kids into the University of Alabama. If you ever watched the movie Forrest Gump, you'll see that. He also appointed African-Americans to some big government positions. And he did a lot of things with that, but also he couldn't, do too much because he said, if you're president, you got to keep votes. And if you don't keep votes, then you might not get to become president again. And that's kind of one of those big things that come out that way. One of the things to look at is the city of Birmingham, Alabama. And this was by far the most segregated city in the United States. We'll take a deeper look at this tomorrow a little bit. And he organized protests with the SDLC there to end segregation in Birmingham. There was a lot of marches, they were trying to do to show freedom of assemble, freedom of speech. And the guy in charge of the Birmingham police force is a guy named Bull Connors, who went by nickname Bull. And he says who will not deal with this protesting in his city. And so he used a lot of methods to harm the protesters who are he said not peacefully assembling. So here you have these are police dogs attacking the protester here. They brought fire hoses out for those who were protesting. And the thing is, remember, this is the age of TV. All this is happening. People are watching this live on TV, and it's exposed to the world. And actually, Martin Luther King Jr. is arrested in Birmingham, put in jail. And when he's in jail, he writes this letter to all the other pastors that are out there saying, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. And here's why you should be doing this too. And I kind of call people around to do the exact same thing. Now, there was a civil rights bill that was proposed in Congress. It would end all legal segregation. It would make sure your voting rights are enforced. You get rid of voting restrictions, those kind of things. But it was filibustered in the Senate. In the Senate, the senators basically talked on and on forever and ever and ever, basically delaying a vote. And the bill looked like it was going to fail. It was probably not going to be passed in Congress and not going to happen. And so King rallied people what's called the March on Washington. Now, A. Philip Randolph, he was that head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porter. He had threatened this to bring attention to African Americans' rights during World War II, and instead FDR signed an executive order to make sure it didn't happen. Martin Luther King Jr. called for one, and SCLC groups and NAACP called for this March on Washington. 200,000 African Americans marched on Washington. See the picture here as they're going up to the Lincoln Memorial. Led Martin Luther King Jr. And it's at this rally where Martin Luther King Jr. gives his famous "I Have a Dream" speech from Lincoln Memorial. Here you see him at the Lincoln Memorial here. Here's people around it. And we'll look at that speech in class as well. A lot of people showed up, huge show of support for this. And it was, kind of that big thing that kind of helped push things over a little bit. Because the major point was, fighting segregation. How can we get along together? How can things be right? How can we have the Civil Rights Bill to make sure that, his dream of black and white working together would actually happen? We'll be looking at this speech in class a little bit too if we can. All right. Now, unfortunately for the Civil Rights Movement, President Kennedy does die while he was in office. He was the last president to be assassinated. Happened November 22nd, 1963. Kennedy was down in Texas running for re-election. And Texas was the home of his vice president, Lyndon Baines Johnson. And so Kennedy liked to ride an open-top convertible, wave to the crowd. Everyone could see him. Everyone wanted to see Jackie as well. As they're going through downtown Dallas, all of a sudden, shots start ringing out. Everyone sees Kennedy reach for his throat and then for his head. So Kennedy is shot twice, once through the throat, once in his head. Another bullet goes hits the governor of Texas, and Kennedy does die while he's there. And then Lyndon B. Johnson is sworn in as the next U.S. president on Air Force One, with Jackie Kennedy there wearing the dress with her husband's blood still on it. We'll talk more about this in class a little bit too. But the huge, everybody remembers where they were when this happened. My mother, she remembers where she was and that her teacher was called out of class and came back in crying saying the president has been shot. People watched TV for hours when this took place. One of those moments, kind of like Pearl Harbor, where you remember where you were when Kennedy was shot. And the person that they accused right away was a guy named Lee Harvey Oswald. He was a guy who had been living in the Soviet Union for a while. He was married to a Russian girl. And they caught him, actually. What happened was he had left there. He shot this place, what was called the Book Depository, where he found his rifle. And later on, he was at a movie theater, and he actually shot a police officer, what it was, and he was arrested for that. Now, a day later, when they're taking Lee Harvey Oswald, this guy right here, out of the jail to the courthouse, this guy right here comes out of nowhere, a guy named Jack Ruby, who owned a strip club in Dallas, pops out of nowhere, and all of a sudden shoots Oswald, and Oswald dies. Now, Oswald denied killing Kennedy, but since Jack Ruby shot him, we have no idea the real story ever comes out. There's actually a lot of conspiracies made about why killing happened. We'll look at a few of those conspiracies in class and actually analyze the idea if there was one shooter or two shooters while we're in class. Guys, that's your background notes here. One more thing here. In the end, guys, there's something called the Warren Commission. Justice Warren, he led the investigation. The official government stance is that Oswald acted alone in killing Kennedy, but it's been doubted for years, and we'll analyze this in class as well. Who did the deed, and if it was one or two people. So that's your notes for today, guys. Got a little too eager there. Thank you very much. Take care of these for Friday, and we'll talk to you then. Thanks a lot. Bye, guys.